Before EA and DICE announced their recent Battlefront game, there seemed to be little hope for fans of the franchise that it would ever return. Since the news had come out that Free Radical Design's ambitious Star Wars Battlefront III project had been canceled, many fans had given up hope that the series would ever be continued. While EA's iteration of Battlefront is a solid game in its own right, we at Gamers wonder how gaming history would have been different if Battlefront III had seen the light of day. Join us as we investigate the origins, development, and eventual cancellation of Battlefront III. Free Radical Design had a storied history before the developer was contracted to begin work on the ill-fated Battlefront sequel. With the studio having been founded by a group of ex-Rare employees, the design studio began with great experience, having worked on legendary games such as GoldenEye 007 and Perfect Dark for the Nintendo 64. Both of these classic titles were revolutionary in the home console market, proving the viability of a multiplayer-focused, first-person shooter even on an aging console such as the Nintendo 64. Any gamer who came of age during the 90s has fond memories of battling with their friends in GoldenEye or Perfect Dark into the early morning hours. These games, along with Rare's other titles, represented highly creative, ingenious designs that pushed gaming in the 3D era to a whole new level. Coming from such an impressive pedigree, the studio seemed destined for greatness.
Will you just let go?
Free Radical's first design after leaving the Rare brand behind, TimeSplitters, seemed to have great potential to become an acclaimed franchise for home consoles, carrying over the fun, fast-paced multiplayer shooter action from GoldenEye and Perfect Dark to the next generation of video game consoles. The game had both a great sense of humor as well as strong first-person shooter mechanics, especially for the generation in which it was released. The game concept was then expanded with two sequels, TimeSplitters 2 and TimeSplitters Future Perfect, both of which showed off Free Radical's prowess for creating big, over-the-top multiplayer experiences on consoles, and also continued to refine and improve the first-person shooter experience for fans of the series. Meanwhile, the Star Wars Battlefront series had captured gamers' imaginations with its first two installments, allowing players to drop into the boots on the ground in iconic Star Wars skirmishes like the Battle of Hoth, the Battle of Endor, and the Assault on the Death Star. Playing a role in these legendary battles had long been a dream of Star Wars fans everywhere, and Battlefront arguably did the best job of translating these to dynamic, action-packed multiplayer matches. However, the games were limited by the relatively slow console hardware of the day. Maps were often sparsely populated in comparison with the franchise's competition, such as the excellent Battlefield games of the day. And with the game's implementation of simplistic artificial intelligence and crude graphics and sound, many longed for a fuller realization of what the games could become. But with the advent of the seventh console generation and continually evolving computer hardware, it looked like the time might be ripe for an all-new Battlefront experience. In 2006, Free Radical secretly began development on a long-awaited sequel to the beloved Star Wars multiplayer franchise. Applying the design studio's chops to the Battlefront experience, Free Radical drafted up ambitious plans for large, sprawling battles that had never been done in gaming before, let alone in the Battlefront franchise or Star Wars universe. While the game would never see the light of day, various leaked trailers, early builds of Battlefront 3, and alpha build footage tantalized gamers with a vision of just how epic the scope of the game would have been. Battlefront 3's ambitious design would have allowed players to take part in ground battles on planets from around the famed galaxy, far, far away, then launch into space and help defend their starships in orbit, or else assault an enemy capital ship or space station. These seamless ground-to-space encounters represented a level of immersion that had rarely been attempted before, and seemed to offer everything fans wanted in a Star Wars multiplayer battle game. Imagine fighting off a droid assault on Coruscant, then jumping in a starfighter and escaping the planet's surface, only to land in an Allied assault ship all the way up among the stars in one seamless level. Or defending the helpless rebel fleet against attacks from the Death Star II in the Battle of Endor, before landing on the planet's surface and assisting with the assault on the shield generator, all in one battle. These ideas and more may have been possible with Free Radical's ambitious design approach to the ill-fated Battlefront III. Further, the game would have allowed for epic starfighter dogfights with the ability to seamlessly launch from a capital ship, zip around taking out enemy fighters, then land back on a friendly ship's docking bay, or even invade an enemy capital ship on foot. This emphasis on big epic battles permeated Battlefront III's design philosophy, with a constant focus on large, over-the-top fights rather than smaller, more intimate affairs. The nuts and bolts of Battlefront III's game mechanics were similar to previous Battlefront games, focusing on blasting away with lasers, supporting other players with a barrage of covering fire, or assaulting key checkpoints and vehicles. Lightsaber battles would have been even more intricate than past series, as the game seemed to include a greater emphasis on dueling with the ancient weapon of the Jedi. While the Battlefront series has rightfully always focused on the multiplayer aspect of the games, Battlefront III would have included a much deeper and more integral story-based single-player mode, complete with cutscenes and an epic clash between the light side and the dark to bookend the game's sprawling battles. Previous Battlefront games have included single-player modes, but their stories were really just a side note to the multiplayer action, while Battlefront III seemed to push its story mode as equally important to the online action. During the campaign, the player would have been able to control a clone trooper called X2, who betrays the Empire and joins the rebellion after he refuses to continue carrying out Order 66, causing him to become involved in every major battle in the Star Wars saga, from Revenge of the Sith through Return of the Jedi. Unfortunately, while Free Radical was hard at work on the impressive third and first-person shooter, other forces from both within the company and outside of it were at work, and would ultimately prove to be the demise of the series. The project's ambitious scope and daunting technical challenges eventually began to harm the game's development and balloon its budget. Even so, one source from within Free Radical claimed the studio came very close to completing the game, getting 99% of the way there, with only a few weeks of bug testing remaining. But near the end of 2008, the then unannounced project was quietly and suddenly canceled. Sources from within Free Radical have claimed that LucasArts simply refused to fund the remainder of the project's growing budget, while one LucasArts source pointed the finger in the other direction, stating Free Radical had a habit of missing deadlines and was unable to give the ambitious project the attention it was due. This may have been due in part to Free Radical's similarly ambitious first-person shooter, Haze, for the PlayStation 3, which allegedly sucked up much of the company's time and many of its development assets ahead of its 2008 release. Shortly after Battlefront III's cancellation, LucasArts turned to Rebellion Developments, who had developed the portable exclusive title Star Wars Battlefront Renegade Squadron, to take what was usable from Free Radical's project and create their own game from it. In 2009, Star Wars Battlefront Elite Squadron was released on the Sony PSP and Nintendo DS handheld systems, bearing striking resemblance to Free Radical's game in that it featured ground-to-space battles, a campaign centered around the story of Clone Trooper X2, and game modes similar to those found in Battlefront III's leaked alpha builds. The cancellation would prove to be a major blow to Free Radical Design, which was acquired shortly after by Crytek and eventually shuttered completely in 2014. Much of the talented developers' work can still be seen in games like the Crisis series and Homefront: The Revolution, though Free Radical as a whole is no more. While mistakes may have been made on the part of the publisher as well as the development studio, either way, the loss of such a great team of artists is certainly a blow to the industry as a whole. While EA and DICE eventually released their own version of Battlefront in 2015, it was a radically different game in size and vision, with a very short list of maps and an anemic single-player component. Gameplay is focused more on fast, frenetic action, rather than careful, strategic approaches. Even though it's an enjoyable shooter in its own way, we can't help but fantasize over what Free Radical's Battlefront III would have looked like in comparison if it had ever been released. As it stands, we may never know, but the impressive footage and leaked builds all point to the possibility that Battlefront III would have been a watershed moment in the history of the franchise, successfully bringing the fan-favorite hit to the 7th generation consoles in a big way. We can only hope that EA takes note of Free Radical's lofty vision and incorporates some of the studio's ideas in future iterations of the series. We hope you have enjoyed investigating the design, development, and ultimate cancellation of Free Radical's Battlefront III with us. For everything Star Wars and Battlefront, keep it locked to gamers.